Feist doesn't look happy. You know, Feist looks jet-lagged and stupid. And in that context, I wasn't happy. So I'm here to flog a new book. You may have heard of it. It's called Magician's End. And the difficulty with talking about Magician's End is, you know, I don't want to see half the people in the room with their fingers and they're going, I'm not listening to Ray, he's doing spoilers. So no spoilers. I'll tell you a little bit about the evolution of the projects, though. You know, when I started writing Magician, it was a lark. I was basically doing it on a bit of a dare from some chunks from university to see if I could write something. Well, I was writing silly little dumb short stories. Several of which I found in the trunk, and yeah, they were pretty silly and dumb. But my friends were very supportive and said, hey, these are great, why don't you do something serious? And as some of you may know, at the time I was at university, I was playing in a role-playing group, and Leukemia was the world we had developed. And I said, well, what do you guys think I should do? And my friend Steve said, hey, why don't you write the story about how the greater magic came to leukemia? And I said, okay. And that was Magician. So we fast forward some 30-odd years, and I'm now wrapping up the world's longest trilogy. Actually, I think I'm still one behind E.C. Tubbs' Doomerus series. I'm not entirely sure, but he may have got 31 out of it. His fairy tale doesn't count. When you approach something like this, you know, you have a lot of concerns. And the first one is it's not to disappoint you guys. You know, one of the things about writing is that you kind of sit in a room by yourself, making stuff up, you know, just being a professional paid liar. And you try to have a little fun in the process. And I am the first one to say, anytime I hear a writer start whining about, you know, the struggle, the pain and the suffering and the sacrifice, I think you need some therapy. I get paid to play Let's Pretend. I can sit in my ratty-ass gym shorts and a t-shirt, drinking coffee all day, taking breaks whenever I want. I never have to answer to anybody except my editor, who is very quick to scold me when I'm goofing off. So I get nothing but good, positive, useful feedback in the process. My job isn't at risk as long as I'm selling books. So it's a good life. It's a very tough job. Writing novels is the hardest thing I've ever done, and it's also the best job I've ever had. And I think that makes a lot of sense because, you know, you need challenges in life, and you need to rise to occasions that make you feel that what you're doing is worthwhile. Now, writers get their applause very late. You know, I get some kid coming to me at Supernova or here who says, I just read Magician. Well, to that 12, 14, 16-year-old kid, that's a brand new book. You know, that I happened to write 33 years ago. Probably about the time his mother was born. I really like the idea, though, that it is new to new readers. I mean, that keeps me fresh. We have a very odd dialogue, you and I. It comes in two parts. And I do my half a long time before you do your half. At least a year. And in some cases, with that new kid, 33 years. And you are the only one who hears both sides. I never hear your side. You know, and it's the engagement of the imagination of the reader that is the ultimate task that will determine the success. Now, I've been lucky. I'm maybe the luckiest guy I know. You know, I've got two gorgeous children who I only want to kill every other day. They're both in college. Dad, need money. What now? Well, I saw a really cute thing and bought it, and now I can't pay my tuition. That's my daughter. Usually it's online and it's got something to do with Japanese anime. My son is usually a computer game or a sports car model or something. But I love them. They're great. I've got good friends. You know, I'm relatively healthy. At least I'm in pretty good shape for the shape I'm in. And I have a lot of fun. And I'm allowed to do all that because of you. And you and I have struck up a relationship. And that's a relationship that's predicated on trust and a promise. And the promise is as long as you keep buying this stuff, I'll bust my ass to give you the most entertainment for the dollar I can imagine. And that's a promise. You know, I will never try anything just to be cute or clever. I will never write anything just to get a check. I will always try to find something to intrigue you. Now, maybe annoy you. I got some letters about certain characters who are no longer with us that weren't happy. Tough, I got more characters, I got tons of them, you know, they got enough, you know. So, Magician's End, as you can imagine, was a tough book to write, but probably not for the reasons you thought. I had no great galloping sense of loss. Somebody asked me, well, gee, you know, I mean, you kill off this character, don't you miss him? I said, well, I can like go back to an earlier book and he's still there. After I blew Jimmy the Hand and his wife up, you know, I can go back and reread Darkness is Settling On and Jimmy's just doing fine. And that's the thing, you know, I'm giving you a glimpse into a universe that has a constancy to it and a lovely sense of completeness because they're still there. They're still there in your imagination, they're still there in the books. But there was a lot of bookkeeping involved with Magicians, and there was a bunch of loose ends to tie up. And the last thing I wanted to turn this into was a shopping list, you know. Okay, let's see, Dread Explained. Okay, political situation in Cash Resolved. Let's see now. Oh yeah, what happened to the boats down in the harbor? You know, and as your eyes are glazing over and you're going, you know, okay, where's the story? On the other hand, I didn't want you writing me emails saying, okay, you know the guy in the closet who was hiding? What happened to him? So trying to find a balance is a task, you know. And I have a firm belief in one aspect of writing narrative, which is that unanswered questions can be just fine as long as they're the appropriate and really good unanswered questions. Because it's the places you guys get to fill in. It's the places where you can say, oh, I guess that's what happened. It's you're adding your own little bit of imagination and creativity to the process. So no, not every single thing you can imagine will be answered. And if you send me email, I will tell you, I don't know. There are mysteries to me too. So I'm going to just leave this whole topic and say, enjoy Magician's End. And if you've already read it, don't spoil it for the others. She kills Dumbledore. I had to tell you. And I'll tell you a little bit about what's next, because no, I didn't die. Some yuts at Harper put up on Twitter, next week is the release of Magician's End. Shall we form a support group? I'm not dead. Hey, here. I'm still writing. Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun. We got a new one for you, boys and girls. The War of Five Crowns, which, yeah, I know it kind of sounds like something George wrote. And frankly, it is kind of like, you know, Game of Thrones, but with show tunes. I just finished a scene where the Tyrion-like character is singing I Feel Pretty. Nah, it's just a coincidence in title. And the first book is called The King of Ashes. And it's going to be a little bit smaller in, you know, I'm not going to have 975 characters spread over 30 years. And hope it's like 3 years because there's 3 books under contract. And it will be a very straight-ahead revenge. Well, okay, nothing I do is straight-ahead. But it will be a straight-ahead revenge motif as I can possibly contrive, or until my characters go on strike and decide to write their own damn book, which they do on regular occasion. You know. Jimmy the Hand was originally supposed to be in one scene. Shows you what I know. Nacor, one book. But that's the beauty of it. You know, I was asked not too long ago, what's my process? And I said, well, what I do is I have this end, this beginning, and then, you know, I know I won't start writing until I know how it's going to end. And then everything else is like, let's see what happens. And I get to kind of read a novel that's new to me as I write it. That's a lot of fun too. I think that King of Ashes, King of Embers, and King of Flames, the War of Five Crowns, I'm really hoping you'll embrace it and enjoy it as much as you had the Maccabean stuff. And then I'm going to do another contemporary fantasy. I haven't done one since Fairy Tale, but it's going to be quite a bit different. And I'm going to tell you the MacGuffin in the beginning, which is that one day everybody wakes up and there's this planet hanging up in the sky, and every talking head on television and every scientific expert they call goes, that can't be there. The gravitational tidal forces would have already ripped this planet to shreds. So it has to be some sort of mass delusional thing, and that's when the white elves show up and start, burning down cities. Because the elder gods have come back and they don't like the world as they found it. Because they got kicked out 15,000 years ago. And after the first year, when 90% of the human race has been munched, and 90% of the survivors are now slaves and building temples and worshiping, the story's going to be about the scattered few in enclaves hidden away who are trying to figure out, well, how did we get rid of them the first time? And that's what that book's about. And after that, we haven't decided. I'm still thinking about that, gay cowboy vampire novel. For some reason, HarperCollins seems a little resistant to it. But I said, okay, well, he won't be overtly gay, just sort of hint at it. And, there'll be paint guns, and he'll glimmer. True story, my daughter walked in one day when I was watching the news, when she was still living with me. And she was holding a book, and I didn't know what it was, and she said, Dad, what happens when a vampire gets exposed to sunlight? And I said, well, okay, it depends on your lore. If you're talking Bram Stoker, nothing, but if you're going with the movie stuff, they burst into flames. And she goes, no, they glimmer. What? And she said, they glimmer. Okay, do we need to make you an appointment? My daughter was not happy with that storyline. Then again, my daughter's into Japanese anime that I don't even want to see on her computer. Those of you who know what I'm talking about. So I think that pretty much covers, what I was thinking that you needed to know, or well, you don't need to know it, but I figure you're here, what the hell. So what happens now is I'm going to stop talking, and somebody's going to put their hand up and ask a question, or it's going to get really weird and quiet. We have a volunteer, first victim. Yes, sir.
What advice would you give to an aspiring author?
Okay, let's get there now. How many of you want to be writers? Come on, don't be shy. Get your hand up. Oh, please don't. You'll be so frustrated. It's the worst choice you can make. Your life will be so much fuller and satisfied if you get into cost accounting, banking, roof repair. Ted Sturgeon, wonderful man, beautiful writer. And I had dinner when he was lecturing at the University of California, San Diego, in about 1977, when I had just started dabbling with the idea of writing a magician. And there were about 12 students with him. I was one. And I said to him, well, I'm thinking of writing a book. And he said, please don't. You'll just be so frustrated and unhappy. And it's just nothing but pain and suffering. So 5 years later, I'm holding a copy of Magician. And I'm at a science fiction convention in San Jose, California, called Bacon. And I see Ted and his wife. And I walked up and I said, hey, I want to give you a copy of this. And he said, oh, really? And I said, yeah. I said, you remember 5 years ago in La Jolla when you said that I shouldn't be a writer, I should do something else? And he looked at the book and he said, I tell that to everybody, the writers never listen. Okay, advice for young writers. I got two things to tell you. First, get your butt in the chair and get your fingers on the keyboard and write. Don't read about writing, don't go to workshops and talk about writing until 4 in the morning and you're caffeinated out of your skull. And then you go home and try to write and it's all gibberish in languages you can't understand. Writing is the only art form, if I can use that term, if I can say, like certain kinds of writing is art, that pretty much all of you have a basic basic understanding of the fundamental tool set. You write a note to your mom. You can write a report to your boss. You can make a shopping list. I mean, you know that there's supposed to be something called object and something called a subject, and there's a verb in there somewhere, but you kind of know generally how to put words on a page. Fine. You don't walk into an art supply store and say, well, I'm going to get some of that stuff and maybe that thing over there and those sticks with the fur on the end, and I'm going to paint a Monet. You don't walk in to a foundry and say, I'm going to do, a Frederick Remington bronze. You don't walk into a music store and say, I'm going to play the cello like Yo-Yo Ma. So why do you think you're going to sit down at the typewriter and write like Stephen King? If you're going to play the piano, you practice. If you're going to play the piano well, you practice a lot. If you're going to play the piano for money and play at the Royal Albert Hall, you're going to practice a lot for years. Writing's the same thing. You must practice. Some of you will have a natural gift for narrative that will allow you to do shortcuts. Some of you will be like me, but maybe not a snappy addresser. And you will have an intuitive grasp of narrative, getting like a sponge even when you didn't know you were, or whatever. But you got to practice. Life can teach you a lot of things, and it's rarely a young person's game. There's an old truism that says young writers write what they've read, old writers write what they've lived. And there's some validity to that. Now, it didn't stop Roger Zelazny from being brilliant at 24. But the odds are against. Okay, so if you stop writing, guess what? You're not a writer. Practice. The other thing you need is endurance. Same thing. Because you're also going to get rejected a lot. You're going to be told by people who think they know better that you don't have any talent, or you should give it up, or this is almost good, but if you change this over here, it'll be better. You'll hear all that crap. Be very, very cautious of writers' groups. I approach those with, the same kind of sense of danger I have if there's a rattler under a car that I need to drive. They can be poisonous. They can make you crazy-like. They can make you doubt yourself. They can make you think that you're wasting your time. Endurance. Practice. Practice endurance. That's what you need if you're a young writer. And then when you get to the point where you honestly think you're ready to go to market, it starts all over again. Endurance. Persistence. Hearing no. Keep going. Someday. You never know. Next question, please. Right over there.
I wanted to know your opinion on fan culture, because I think I read somewhere that you didn't allow for fan fictions and other stuff.
Yeah, fan fiction, okay, very good.
But I just wanted to know your opinion on other people who haven't actually said no.
Well, every writer has a choice. There's certain things about fan fiction that you have to understand, systemically, and then within that, any writer is free to make any choice he or she wants. First of all, it's my copyright. We start with that. I own it. Why? Because I created it. Anything you write in Bohemia is what they call, under the International Copyright Convention and the Berne Copyright Convention, a derivative, and derivatives are mine, even if I don't write them. So start with the fact that if you create a Jimmy and a Rutha story, you're infringing on my copyright. You're in my toy box without asking my permission. Remotely associated with my name. That's me. Okay, that's my thing. But there's also some legal issues, and I'll give you two quick stories. The first one was Marion Bradley, God rest her soul, was very, very supportive of people playing in the Dark Over universe. And then there's a young woman who is actively published now who maintains this story is not accurate. And we got into an argument about it once, and I think she's full of beans. Who wrote a short story for the Dark Over magazine, and Marion said, that's kind of cool, but it's also very much like something I'm doing. How about I, use that character in my novel, and I'll give you a really nice acknowledgement. And the woman said, no, I want 50% of the royalties, and I want co-authorship on the cover. And Marion dropped the project. Marion killed the book, rather than deal with the possibility of litigation. You should never be able to take that away from an author who you say you respect. You know, that's number one. Number two is Chelsea Quinn Yarborough, her St. Germain Vampire Stories. You know, fanzine editor and a writer said, hey, we'd like permission to do a St. Germain story because we really love your stuff. And Chelsea said, thank you, but no. And they did it anyway. And they put this idiot disclaimer that said, this story was done without permission, which, by the way, in court is known as an admission of culpability. How do you plead? Oh, guilty, okay. Because you put it in writing on the document. That's when you go to court and get what they call a summary judgment. You don't even have to go to trial. The judge basically says, okay, you are that stupid, guilty. and then beloved, not intended to infringe on the copyrights of Chelsea Quinn Yarborough. Well, gee, you know, you can say, I didn't mean to kill your cat, but you still backed over it because you weren't paying attention. It doesn't matter. There are certain acts of criminality that have nothing to do with intent. There's a whole legal thing we could do a clinic on about mens rea, which is what they call the guilty mind, and about certain pleas. But in this case, it's like just saying, I didn't mean to do harm doesn't get you off the hook for doing harm legally. So, Chelsea got, okay, and I'll wrap this up because I'm getting a little long-winded on it. Chelsea's lawyer, who is a dear friend of mine, sent a cease and desist letter to these girls and basically said, okay, you have to publicly apologize, you have to print that apology in your silly-ass magazine, but you also have to buy a little, you know, thing in Publishers Weekly, and that ain't cheap. You know, that's gonna cost me a few $1,000. And they kind of ignored him. He finally wrote a letter that said effectively, you're a couple of very stupid little girls who you better clean up your act and get this together or we're going to drag your ass into court and get a judgment. So, guess what the result was? The young ladies did as they were bid, and suddenly fandom was saying, Chelsea, why are you being mean to fans? Is it fair for them to damage her relationship with her other fans? Because fandom somehow clones together and says, oh, the author's being mean to us. Okay, these are two reasons why I'm against fan fiction in general, and I refuse to allow it in my universe. You know, I don't want people saying, oh, Feist is an asshole, you know, because he sued the guy who made $12 million off of his copyright. Well, okay. I'll let a guy do it for $12 million if I get half. Sure.
Do you think that ebooks have helped or hindered authors?
My friend Simon and I have been talking about this all week, and I've been talking about it with my publisher for the last 12 years. We have no idea. This new technology, God, if you know, you'll make so much money as a consultant. Nobody knows. You know, there's lots of pundits out there who are saying, oh, well, you know, ebooks are doing blah, blah, blah. You know what? I really haven't seen any material evidence of a clear impact. There are those who say, oh, well, it expands the market. And there are those who say, oh, no, it cannibalizes traditional books. I have no idea. And I've had ebook, you know, rights deals with HarperCollins for 10 years now. And we still don't know what a good business plan is. So the answer is, I don't know. If my best guess is based on one thing. When I was at university, I studied a Canadian economist named Harold Adams Ennis, who was the mentor of a media guy named Marshall McLuhan. And Ennis made this observation, and I'll spare you the 1-hour lecture version of this and go right to the punchline, which is books do a really good job of being books. You know? You pick them up and you open the page and there are words on them and you can read it. And you can take it with you, and if it's a little one, you can stick it in your back pocket. And if it falls into the bathtub, well, hell, you can go buy another one. And if your Kindle falls in the bathtub, well, hell, you know. Or God help me, it's an iPad. Yes, sir.
Wondering if you just mentioned the Atlas and how that's going becoming a secret.
Thank you, because I forgot to plug a product. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I'm not even Catholic. The Chronicles, okay, it's called Midkemia, the Chronicles of Pug. So, in theory, Magician's End isn't truly the beginning. In your bookstores, this fall. Wonderful for Christmas gifts. By 2. Originally, many years ago, I pitched the idea to HarperCollins that we would do the Atlas of Leukemia, thinking in terms of the Atlas of Kern, the Atlas of Middle-earth. In other words, a really boring, thick book full of text and little pictures that only appeals to hardcore geeks. Fortunately for all of you, after me, that idea morphed. And so now what we have is a book that, the vanity, the author's vanity of this book is that okay, Pug found all this crap in Macros's tower at the end of the Rift War. Actually after darkness, so it's after the Great Uprising. And so he's trying to organize it. So he decided to put it all together, and he's got notes and things. So it's the evolution of these documents that Pug has found with his notation, and later with Magnus's notations about his dad. Gorgeous art by Steve Stone and his crew in London, and some really nifty maps. So for those of you who are map heads and you like pretty pictures, this is your book. The other thing about it is they had some clown named Feist actually write the text. And, it's Pug's voice and Magnus's voice, and I did it in a way which I hope really is kind of fun for you. A little dramatic irony in here, which is that you're going to see Pug's perspective on events that you read about in the Rift War books. And then later on Magnus's perspective on his father's perspective. And it's an interesting project. I think that some of you will find it worth checking out. It will be out last quarter this year. And seriously, I think it's going to be October, November. Question back there. Actually, could you stand up? Because I got to tell you, I flew in from Brisbane this morning. My ears still haven't popped. So if you see me falling and say screaming, that's what that is.
Is there ever going to be plans for a movie or a music?
Okay. Let me explain. If you have 150 million, we can start tomorrow. I'll blow off Perth. Straight to the wedding cave. Talk to those guys. I know some guys in LA, they'll fly down to New Zealand. We'll have a party. Guys, we're getting the band back together. The way it works is writers write books, and studio creatures crawl out from under the... And they call my agent and say, what rights are available? And we have lunch. Now, in the 30 years I've been in this business, I've made quite a bit of money on options for rights for short windows of time that they never get it together and the rights revert. And I've had a lot of really good lunches. So whenever a studio guy calls, my first thought is, okay, is this, you can tell what's happening by where they take you. When they run you up to Malmaison, or you go to back in the day, the Brown Derby, okay, fine, these are some serious players. When the guy says, okay, I'm Mr. So-and-so's assistant, and we found this really interesting little, obscure hole-in-the-wall 4-table restaurant in Santa Monica that's trending really nice with the LA Reader, which is the freebie weekly that tells you all the restaurant reviews and things. Then they want the rights for free. As soon as somebody, this is not one of those things where somebody says, gee, maybe somebody should suggest a Feist, they should, hello. Every writer in the business is looking for that check. George Martin is a terrific writer. Okay, I've been a fan of George's since before I met him. He's a good guy, he's a really good guy. And he's made more money in 1 year from the licensing rights to Game of Thrones toys, whatever they have out there. But I mean, the stuff that you go order online because you want a dragon or whatever. It's like I guarantee my kids get through college money. So yeah, of course. But no, we have no plans, and I will say this because I'm really getting tired of the question, do you think we'll keep it a secret? Over here.
Have you ever considered reworking a contemporary piece of history? I'm thinking of like David Gemmell.
The dreaded alternate history model. Yeah, I did actually a couple of times. In fact, I almost sold a contract for a series of alternate history books, and I was talking to Jane Johnson, who's my publisher in London, and the thought I had was, okay, so what if the Salem witch hunters were looking for like real witches? Ooh. You know. a little R.E. Howard's Solomon Kane kind of action. If you know the old pulp writers, then you know what I'm talking about. Really cool stuff. He's the guy who invented Conan and Call. But he also had this like really crazy Puritan guy who was like in darkest Africa battling monkey gods. This sort of stuff. And I realized that I had a great idea and no story. You know, it's like, you know, guys, I got this idea. I want you to write me a book and we'll split the money. Big flying monkeys. Yeah, so let me know what my money's in. Ideas are not stories. And what I realized about the whole Magic Works thing is that, you know, it's the whole, you know, Star Trek do-over, we just started an alternate timeline. Every time a magician threw a spell in Egypt, you know, the Roman Empire vanished. You know, nobody found America, or, you know, the Atlanteans were here first, or, you know, it's just, you can't dress that up and make it an alternate history. Because by the time you get, you know, past the first guy in a cave who figures out magic, all Earth history changes. So the first thing you do is say, when do you nail it down? And I thought, well, if maybe, you know, some spell somewhere. And then I got, you know what, I still don't have a story. And when you spend a month or two worrying about the mechanics of the universe, and you still don't have a story, you still don't have a story. So yeah, we thought about it, but I kicked that one to the curb. Way in the back there, sir, please speak up loudly because I'm old.
I noticed that in your book, The Magician, as to the talent of the Silver Hawk.
Okay, I'm really going to need you to stand up and be authoritative with your speaking.
In your book, The Magician, when it goes over to like talent of the Silver Hawk, you can tell there's been a lot of change in your life. Like talent of the Silver Hawk's got a lot to do with restaurants and hotels. How hard do you find it keeping your current life outside of your writing?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. You're right about what you know. And I mean, obviously, I've never had tea with a dragon. So, so that part I just made up. But, you know, when you're trying, okay, you know, I don't even know how many characters I've got in the 30 books. I mean, we one time, for a movie pitch, some guy said, well, how many speaking parts? And so we went through and counted, and I had 80 characters in Magician that had dialogue. I mean, some of it was one line, but there were still 80 speaking parts. You got to come up with ways in which these guys are not all the same. You know, you got to come up with different experiences. And the problem with fantasy in general is you have these tropes. You have these sort of, you know, you don't have a Western without a horse. You don't have a murder mystery without a murder. You don't have fantasy without some fantastical things in it. But, you know, you just got so many hairy-chested barbarians. You know, just so many chicks in chainmail. You know, just so many, you know, evil wizards with a bad fashion sense, you know. Or, you know. So when I did Talon, I started thinking about in terms of the kids. You know, first I had Pug and Thomas. And I got lucky with those guys. You know, I managed to hit a nerve. They're really charming. They're charming kids when you meet them. You kind of like them. It's sort of my Huck and my Tom. And then they get into really weird stuff. But at the heart of those two characters is still those two charming kids. I knew I could never duplicate that. I knew that was it. It was a one-shot. I mean, if I tried it again, everybody would say, okay, Feist can only do one type of character, and the second time isn't as good. So completely ignoring that, I created Eric and Rue. The anti-Pug and the anti-Thomas. Eric's a pretty good kid, but he's got a horrible temper. And Rue's just the guy you do not want your sister dating. In fact, you don't even want him to know her name. But, you know, we would redeem him. Okay, so when I did Talon, I picked a kid who's a primitive. You know, very rich culture, very, you know, ancient society, but technologically they're primitives. And they get run over by history, literally. So I said, okay, what do you do with that kid in the dramatic context of turning him into an agent for the Conclave? You turn him into a sophisticate. I've got friends who, you know, their lives changed when they walked into a kitchen. You know, guys that you would not imagine in a million years, you know, really had wished that they had gone to the culinary academy. Yeah. They love wine, they love theater, they love, you know, it's just because a person comes from a given background. Never assume that they're limited in their potential to discover worlds outside of their birth world. Otherwise, nobody ever changes. And every generation is like the generation before. So, you know, now by the time I got to Magician's End, you know, Chaos Wars, it was trying to get back and rediscover the charm again. You know, Bethany and the three brothers. They weren't Bud Thomas and Carlene, but they echoed. They reminded you of what it was like at the beginning in Cry Deep. And I brought them forward because I needed a sense of triumph. I mean, I knew there was going to be a lot of ugly stuff happening and a lot of high price, a lot of sacrifice. So at the end of Magician's End, I wanted a combined sense of regret for the loss, but also a sense of triumph, that something good came out of all that. So if that answers your question, it's basically you can't keep doing the same stuff over and over, or you guys get grouchy.
In your years of writing a book, what has been your most awkward moment with a fan?
I'm sorry, did you just ask me what my most awkward moment
With a fan.
with a fan was? Well, I know you're waiting for something seriously salacious. Me too. Well, what happened was I was in London about 5 weeks ago. And this mad woman and her boyfriend walk in, and they're like, you know, I mean, if we were in California, say a biker and his chick walked in, you know, that's what they look like. You know, hair down to here, and you know, leathers and tats, full sleeves. And she walks up and says, and gets a book, and then she says, "Would you sign my arm?" Okay, you know, I've signed body parts before, not often. It kind of creeps me out, but what the hell. So I took a Sharpie and I wrote my name. So about 20 minutes later, as we're getting in the queue, she keeps running back in to show me the cellophane over the tattoo. Where she had gone to a tattoo parlor 2 doors down and had them ink over my signature. Now that's pretty freaky. And I don't know what she's going to do if she hates the next book.
Now, you've written had a few collaborations with other writers. Logistically, how do you do that?
Usually with a whip chair and a gun. The question was, how do I collaborate? You know? I could do a whole riff on collaboration. The short answer is, one, it's my universe, therefore I'm the boss. And you got to have that. You got to have a tiebreaker. If you collaborate with another writer, somebody's got to get the tie-breaking vote. Janie and I fought like cats and dogs over a lot of stuff. And the thing I love about Janie Worse is she's one tough cookie and very determined. So when she dug her heels in, I knew she had an investment in that particular, you know, point. But what happened was we argued and argued and argued, and then we came to a compromise that was better than what either one of us wanted. So one of the reasons that the Empire series is freaking rock solid from front to back. I wanted to do that series before I met Janie. I wanted to do the other side of the Rift War. And in fact, I talked to my editor way back in the day about doing just that. You know, let's do another trilogy from the Serrani point of view. You know, a little, you know, Lawrence Durrell Alexandria Quartet kind of thing for those of you who know the books. You know, so it's 4 books set in Alexandria, Egypt, and it's the same exact story, but it's told from the point of view of 4 different characters. Kind of a writer's vanity thing, which is sort of interesting. It's more interesting than it's fun. One of the books is really good, and that's Mantra List. The rest, the other 3 not so much. But I've never been a 19-year-old girl, so I felt a little disadvantaged at writing a book, you know, just a tad. And I'm sure that many of you have had that experience where you're reading a female character and going, okay, it's a guy in drag. So I chased Janie for a year to get her to collaborate. I really had to twist her arm a lot, and so we finally did it. And it was going to be 1 book, and then, you know, as such things go, it got bigger and bigger. There are things in that book I shake my head and go, in a million years, I never would have thought of that. And I'm really glad that she was here to think of that. She was getting married when we were doing Servant of the Empire, so there were big hunks of Servant that I went solo on. I was getting married when we were doing Mistress of the Empire, so there were big hunks of that she did solo. But the lovely thing about it is I don't think you guys could go through and pick out which parts those were. Because there's a Feist voice and a Wirtz voice, and by the time we got to that point, we had both understood what the Feist and Wirtz voice was. She's a hell of a talent. The other three guys was a long business story about another publisher wanting to do some things and Harper stepping in and saying, no, only Harper publishes Feist. So suddenly I had, 3 books with 3 other guys. And all 3 were writers that I really admire, and Joel was a personal friend of mine for years, God rest his soul. I admired Steve, I admired Bill, and all 3 presented different challenges. Never give Steve Sterling a book with kids in it. I had to rewrite that bad boy in 2 weeks. And the fact that he didn't give me back the book that we agreed on kind of surprised me. Not in a good way. But, Jimmy the Hand with his flaws, I think is still an entertaining read. I had more fun than monkeys on ice skates writing Honored Enemy. That was like writing with myself. Bill Fortune was handing me stuff that I'm just going, wow, this is so cool. I remember specifically saying, I got to do something. I'll be gone for about 4 days, 5 days. Hey, can you handle the first draft on, when they're like having to escape at the cliff? I'm driving around. This is the beauty of collaboration, because you get to look inside somebody else's creative processes when you know what the problem is and you want to see how it's solved. So I get back thinking, well, it's like, maybe they're going to like fight a battle here and have guys who are rappelling down the cliff with ropes and stuff. No, he turns the Serrani into the Army Corps of Engineers. They're felling trees and building a bridge. I'm like, wow, they got field engineers, that's so cool. I never thought of it. I really like that book a lot. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more, and boy, you guys just want to know everything. You, sir.
There was an old game that was brought out a while ago, which was, I think, Condor Betrayal.
Yeah, Betrayal Condor, yeah.
Yeah, there was rumors about an online multiplayer game.
Oh yeah, I started that. Nobody believed it. No, the problem is I say one thing. I mean, welcome to the wonderful world of the internet. I say one thing, and the next thing you know, I'm engaged with Princess, so-and-so, or I'm an agent of the evil Mongol Empire, or, what I said was, I was talking online about game stuff, and somebody brought up Betrayal Condor or Return of Condor, and they thought they were a lot of fun and all that. And said, well, what would I like? And I said, well, I would like, Blizzard to call and say, we want to do another one. Nimikimia. See, my kids and I play Warcraft because they're away at college, and it's something we can do online for an hour or an hour and a half. We have our own little guild on one of the servers. And, I got about 104 really scary people who are on my mailing list who joined. Well, I had to let them. Somebody told them where I live. And we play, just because it's something, because we do a little chat while we're running around. My son's just a genius at raids and dungeons, and Dad, don't do it. Okay, go back when you're resurrected and come join us. So I'm learning the hard way. But I looked at the math, and I'm going, okay, I got $13 a month minimum, 10 million subscribers. I'll take 2% of that. No, but that was the point. It was just abstracted what ifing, and I said, yeah, I love it. And then some guy said, oh, there's going to be a Feist from your mouth to God's ear, but I don't think it's going to happen. Another question. Young man back there, please stand up and be very loud, because I'm getting deaf.
Could you explain how Midgame has turned from role-playing into the place where your book series takes place?
Yes, I can. Oh, you want me to explain it? I see. Okay, what happened was, I'm afraid I'm going to have to make this the last story and then have to get to the books, because you guys are just jamming up the room. And I really need to get back. Yeah, I didn't realize being a Yank that Frankston is not in Melbourne. I realized that this is like somebody saying, oh yeah, we're in Anaheim. It's only an hour and a half down the freeway, if there's no traffic. Anyway, glad to be here, though. I'm serious. You know, I mean, how many times in my life am I going to get to a Frankston? One more tick on the bucket list. Okay, leukemia. One day, back in my ill-spent youth, when I was at university, I was attending John Muir College at the University of California, San Diego. I'm walking through the Commons, sauntering sort of, with my friend Ethan Munson, and I hear somebody behind, there was a partition there, we were inside of the Commons in one of the multifunction rooms, and I hear somebody say, okay, I'm getting ready with my spell as soon as the dragon looks somewhere else. Really? And my friend Ethan says, oh yeah, there's a D&D game going on the other side of the room. And I said, doesn't that involve like ball gags and whips? That's D&D. And okay, fine. He said, oh yeah, that's Rich. And I know who that guy is. And he said, yeah, there's a game every Thursday night, and I've been a couple times. This is kind of cool. So, make a very long story short, because we are running out of time, I went over one night and found out that I really wasn't that crazy about role-playing, but I really liked the guys and the gals. It was a good group. They were mostly graduate students, so they were my age, because I went back to college late. I was a little slow, really slow. And I kind of got intrigued with the environment, so Mikimi at that time was Steve's City of Crondor and John's City of Lamut and some dungeons and some overland stuff between the two cities, and then Steve Barrett had sort of created the Free Cities of Natal, and Conan Lamont created the province of Yvonne, and then there were some other things that went in there, but that's about it. And okay, fine. So we fast forward like 3 years later. I'm now actively having a lot of fun playing that game. And I said at one point, hey, I wrote a really dumb story about this guy, one of my characters, because I had some really dumb characters. And it was a really kind of pathetic little attempt to write a story, but my friend said, oh, it's pretty funny. Well, I wrote a couple more, and then one day, one of my friends said, yeah, try something a little serious about this, because you got some talent here. I said, well, what do you mean by serious? He said, I don't know, why don't you tell the story about how the greater magic came to leukemia? So the first thing I tried to write seriously was magician. And I said, oh, I don't want to write like a whole new universe, can I use leukemia? And Steve said, yeah, if we do publish the game, it'll be good publicity. And that's how the tail wags the dog. Anyway, I would love to do this for another hour. No, actually, I'm having fun. I mean, people ask me, don't you get tired? And I go, no, it's actually dealing with you guys is the fun part. It's the cars and the planes and the room service. That's the part that sucks. But anyway, thank you for turning out. And I got to give you a couple things. I have, arthritis condition in this hand, which is, well, one, I'm old, but also I broke it and it didn't heal right. And with all of you, I'm going to really have to insist that we just do 3 signatures only. I can't do dedications because the little muscles don't work the way they should. I can do a signature without a problem, but the little guys are just useless. Fortunately, I can still type, different set of muscles. But if you queue up wherever you're supposed to queue up, the actor who's hired to play me will show up. I'm going to go to the pub. But no, thank you again. I've been having a great time in Australia, and this is another great time, and I really want to thank you all for turning out.